everybody, and welcome to Powerful Stuff. I hope that you guys are having an amazing start to the week. And after this last week's episode of everything you need to know about manifestation, tactical action, and making your dreams a reality, that you are well on your way. And this week we are talking about communication and boundaries. Dun, dun, dun. Some real kickers in our personal lives, am I right? And the reason we do communication and boundaries after manifestation in my group coaching program, The Upgrade, is like once we've visioned that place of possibility and the aligned actions that we want to take to get there, then we get to envision who is that version of us who is stepping into that dream reality, and what boundaries do they have in place? How are they communicating to others? And what boundaries are they putting into place to protect their energy so they can take the aligned actions to get themselves the manifestations? And that is why after we vision in our powerful manifestation week, we go into communication and boundaries. So we're actually going to start with boundaries. And the reason that we're going to start with boundaries today is this, because once we are clear on what we want our boundaries to be for ourselves and our boundaries with others, then we communicate those firstly to ourselves, and then we communicate those to others. And lo and behold, guys, we are living in alignment. We are in our flow, and our highest self has the time and space to motherfucking thrive. So that is why we set it up that way. And I want to have a little conversation first about boundaries. We'll do some of my own anecdotes. We'll go into some of yours, and then we'll get to do our powerful communication and have a little meditation around the communication, as always. So with boundaries, we can either be too porous in our boundaries, meaning we don't have good boundaries with others, or we can be too strict in our boundaries. We want the Goldilocks equation where it's like not too porous, not too strict, just right. And you're like, but Meredith, how do I get there? Don't worry, I'm going to tell you. So in the porous example of the boundaries, maybe that would be what some might call people pleasing, right? And when we're people pleasing, we are trying to anticipate the needs, the desires, the wants of others. We want and care for their reaction so much that we lose sight on what's best for us by trying to anticipate their needs. So when we have porous boundaries, it might look like us saying yes to people when we really don't want to go, but we're afraid of disappointing them or what they'll think if we don't say yes. It might look like us bending over backwards to do things for someone else when we don't have time, and it's draining our cup. And the more it drains our cup, the less time we have to fill our cup. And then the more resentful we get of these other people because we have unvocalized boundaries. So we get resentful when we have unvocalized boundaries, people. That is how resentment happens. And so that's why it's important to identify these things. And so when we have porous boundaries, what ends up happening is our energy is like pulled into other people's energies. We lose our self-trust because we're so much anticipating the needs and wants of others that we lose that trust in ourselves. And we just become so tired. We're so tired and we're so fatigued because whether it's a friendship boundary that drains us, or maybe it's a work boundary that we haven't set, what ends up happening is we give so much to the things or the people that we know don't light us up or aren't in alignment that we have little time for ourselves. And it can also be a form of procrastination. Porous boundaries can be a form of procrastination. Here's the kicker, guys. It can be a form of procrastination because when we are in people pleasing or doing things for others, we get to be like a martyr, or, oh, I'm so busy doing this for other people, I have no time for myself, which means that we actually might be super afraid of being seen or having a big platform or putting time to our creative efforts. So we get to do something that feels purposeful, quote unquote, by helping or being overly there for others without any time for ourselves. So it can be a form of procrastination. And I'm not saying like don't ever show up for your friends, but I'm saying that boundaries should be an earned thing over time where we feel reciprocal and we feel in touch with our needs the whole time. And of course, then with a friend or a family member, if crisis arrives and we just need to be all hands on deck for that, we do it then, but it's not like an all the time type of thing. So when you have a porous boundary, a few things might happen when you communicate that you're ready to readjust your boundaries into something that serves you better, someone might get snappy or defensive, maybe because they're used to you being super accommodating, all the time. And they don't necessarily, it feels new and uncomfortable for them to receive this from you, that they might end up like feeling defensive because you're kind of retracting something that they're used to having. So just know that that's a reaction that could happen. It might not. They might respect you immediately. And another reaction is they might also get defensive or triggered because they can't set good boundaries in their own life. So it's triggering to be mirrored or confronted that. And we're going to go over this part in the communication show. But the biggest thing is in these instances to know that in the long run, if those people are meant to be in your life, they have unconditional love for you. They know that when you do what's best for you, you do what's best for everyone. So even though they might be disappointed, and that's okay, right? It's okay to acknowledge that they might be disappointed. Even if they're disappointed, they'll in the end ultimately respect your decision and respect your time more because we show others how to treat us. What? Retweet. We show others how to treat us. And so I just want to give you an example of like when I had porous boundaries in two different ways. And then I'm going to ask you guys to think about it. And then we'll go to the strict boundaries and what those can signify. So when I had porous boundaries, oh gosh, that would look like, in my early 20s, like I would let people who I didn't know that well stay with me at my house for like many days, sometimes weeks. And I like felt the need to plan everything for them, or like if they needed a ride from the airport, I would say yes. And these were people that I like didn't know that well. And then they asked if someone else could stay too. And I said, sure. And like these people slept in my bed while I like slept on the couch, like instead of and I was like, these people at the time who I do really like, and it's no fault of theirs, right, for asking, but if I'm being honest with myself, I wanted to like impress these people because they were friends with my ex-boyfriend. And so, and we were already broken up at the time. So I think there was like that little disconnected from Meredith's needs moment of like, oh, well, maybe if I'm like overly giving to them and we get to have this connection, it's like some way of having some sort of like, maybe they'll tell him, or it's just like my good karma points and that energetic force field. So if I'm being so honest with myself, and if you guys happen to be listening, love you, grateful for your time in LA. But this is just something I realized about myself in my 20s growing up. And this is just the first example that popped to mind. Now, flash forward, if I were to revisit that dynamic, or in my own boundary setting, I would be like, okay, what amount of time does spending with people, especially people who I'm like just not like some of my close friends, but some like great people that I know or might have just met, what does it look like if they ask me to stay at my house? Well, first I can check in with myself. Like, does that feel good? Do I have the time and space to have someone else's energy in my house? Secondly, I could say like, yeah, I'm happy to host you for a night, but my husband and I have a 2-night policy with people just because we both work from home. So we want to protect that energy. Or like, hey, I can't host you, but I would love to see you while you're here. Like, let's do a hike. What does your Friday look like? And all of those answers are fine, but it really comes down to you checking in with yourself of like, what does feel good in this scenario, right? Like, do I have the energy to host this person? And how I've implemented like this specific type of example with boundaries with people that I host now is like, I do say like my husband and I have like a 2-night policy with people unless they're like one of our ultimate, very, very, very best friends. And we'll also say like we have a 2-night policy. We also work from home. So if you stay with us, if you can kind of be out of the house from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. when we take our calls, that would be great. If all of that sounds great, you're welcome to stay with us. If not, like would love to see you and grab coffee. Like, what's your schedule like? Okay. So that's like a porous boundary, and the work I had to do on myself to get there was it's okay. It's okay to say no to things. And if people get upset, that's fine. That's their reaction. And, or if they hold on to that, it's a data point about them in the long run. And I'm already like doing enough, and I am enough. And so anything I do or see with this person while they're here is also enough. And then one other porous boundary is just, there's so many actually now that I think about it, but I'll just do a few rapid fire ones, guys. And then I want to hear from you what your porous boundaries are. But one of them is, in dating, before I met Spencer, I would like go out on dates with guys. And because I wanted them to be impressed by me, I would be like, I'll give you a pigeon. I'm a yoga teacher too. So I'd be like, I'll give you a pigeon adjustment. Or let me pull your tarot card for you. Or I'd be telling them all the coolest things about my life story within that first date to get them to like me, right? Those boundaries were because I wanted to prove to them. So it was kind of selfish if you really think about it. I wanted to prove like, hey, I'm likable, I'm lovable. So here are all these things about me. And what ended up happening in those is that because I overgave, my boundary was like, whoa, so open. Usually it ended up scaring them away. And so because you're just so disconnected from your own needs, you're so not valuing your own time or gifts, that it can actually have the adverse effect. So that was that example in dating, and how I recalibrated that. Again, when it's like, I know that I am enough and I know that I am lovable, these things like my beautiful pigeon adjustments and tarot cards that I pull for people are earned. So our first date is about getting to know each other and how do we feel in each other's energy. And then maybe he does something nice and fun for me, and then maybe I do something nice and fun for him. And it's this like beautiful beach volleyball momentum, right? He tosses it over the net, I toss it back. He tosses it over, I toss it back. Not like I'm going to throw all my balls in your court at once and just decide which one you want, So that's just a calibration example of that one. And then the last boundary I want to talk about is professional at work. Hold on. I'm going to just have a sip of my zero sugar ginger beer from Trader Joe's. No, it's not sponsoring the podcast, but Meredith Baker Coaching is. 1 second. Que refrescante. Okay, so the other work boundary is like in my 20s, I did a ton of stuff for free, right? I was an international journalist and I had my beverage company. So not only with my beverage company, like there were two things that happened with that and with yoga. With my beverage company, because we weren't yet to market, people would just think they were doing us a favor if we could sample our beverage at their event. And sometimes if it was a really cool event, it could have been argued that it was great brand exposure. But other times I just said yes to those things because I didn't want to let that person down. And what if it's like a contact later on? But, saying yes to sampling your beverage at events is like all this money that you're spending to be at the event and to have manual labor there. And who knows like what the return on investment is going to be for being there. And I just said yes to so many things, got burnt out. A lot of these things didn't have any impact on us, like getting investment for our beverage or anything like that. And had I checked in, like what, or even asked them some of the questions of like, what do we get from it in return? Are we getting photos? Like, do people usually convert into sellers? Like what kind of audience is going to be there, right? I just kind of said yes because I didn't want to ask them those questions. I ended up giving up so much free product. And then like from the other professional sense of like yoga and also like some of my like coaching and healing things, like a lot of people, or I would just say yes to like doing a lot of free like yoga classes and meditations in my 20s, which was great at a certain time to get reps and to get practice. But then like part of my boundaries like that I had to work through in my mid 20s coming out of that was like not just doing like non-traditional things like yoga, healing, coaching for free or a discounted price because I was so used to offering that and everyone was so used to expecting that from yoga teachers or healers or coaches because it's like, a non-defined field in terms of like your hourly rate, so to speak. And so I had to really do the work on myself of like, what do I value? What would I pay for my own work? And then how can I set that boundary in place with myself when I'm offering my yoga, when I'm offering my coaching. And the last thing I'll say about that too is like boundary setting actually makes clients respect you more. And I've also done this with clients who like, sometimes when things get hectic, their coaching session is the first session they're going to reschedule. And they would, in the past, when I first started out as a coach, they would do this last minute and be like, sorry, rescheduling it for next week, or like cancel on me and like be like, well, what do you have next Tuesday instead? And it's like, well, my schedule is just as valuable as yours. And I just actually, now that you canceled, like can't rebook someone else in that time. So I started making a 48-hour cancellation policy where if you do not give me notice within 48 hours, then it still counts as a session. And at first it was like so harsh to implement, right? Because I didn't always start with that policy, but actually it ended up A, respecting my time more, and B, holding them more accountable to the changes that they wanted to get out of coaching. And so I will say that even though it was a harder boundary to implement, but also a pretty standard one in the coaching space, my clients ended up respecting me more and respecting our sessions more, and thus were able to get more out of it because they were more consistently showing up for themselves, which, guys, just goes to show when you do what's best for you, you do what's best for everyone. So while we're still on the porous boundaries, before we move to constricting ones, I just want you to pause this recording and maybe you say it out loud, or maybe you write it down. Like, what are some porous boundaries that you have where you feel like you're overgiving, you're disconnected from your needs, or you're people pleasing? And I want you to go through this, maybe what's a personal relationship where that's happening? Why is that happening in that personal relationship? What do you fear will happen if you actually recalibrate that boundary, or say that you need this boundary recalibrated? And then go through it in your professional life too. What is a professional boundary that you don't feel like you're valuing yourself in? What would need to be put in place for that boundary to feel in alignment? Okay, go. Welcome back, guys, from that boundary setting activity. I hope you paused it. I hope you said it out loud. And I hope that you took note of what boundary needs to be put in place, because we are going to take this through our communication after this, and it's going to all fit so beautifully together. I can't even tell you. But before we move on, I also just want you to write down, like, what personal boundary have you been a little bit porous in? Maybe it's like giving all your time to your scrolling when you could be like creating or seriously recharging. Maybe it's, a personal boundary that's you're like porous around, where you let something be messy for weeks on end and feel like mad at yourself. So just also noting one porous boundary with yourself that you have, and what would that like more firm boundary look like? And the cool thing about this is when you think about like whether it's a teacher or a caregiver that you've had in the past when you were little, like somebody who has boundaries with you, right? They're not just going to give you everything, but they're loving and firm. And those boundaries, view it as like the space, the dimensions on the canvas to allow you to paint with freedom, which is so beautiful. And so that's one. And then as we start to recalibrate those porous boundaries, we start to give energy back to ourselves. And as we give that energy back to ourselves, we reinvest in ourselves. What does Meredith feel like doing? Or what do you feel like doing with that new extra energy? How can that strengthen your self-trust? And then that actually helps guide your aligned actions for whatever you want to manifest for your aligned actions moving forward. Okay, and the last little boundary situation I want to talk about is when we are too tight on our boundaries, when we're holding on to control. And so this can happen a lot in the field of expectation, when we're like maybe planning a trip and we want everything to go a certain way, and we want to do this, and then we want to do that, and then we want to do that. And or it can happen in relationships when we realize we have super, super high standards for people. And it's good to have high standards, but like maybe it's like to a ridiculous point where it's like your boundaries are so high that it's actually like pushing people away from you. And so, excuse me, guys, I want you to look or feel into, maybe even just close your eyes for a second, feel into where you know you're holding on too tight, where your defenses are so tight around something. Maybe it's expectation around something in your life. Maybe it's around certain relationships in your life. And just checking in with where that constriction feels present. And just breathing a little space into it, almost imagining like a loosening of a grip. And just asking that internal space where that grip is loosening of like, why am I holding on tight here? What do I fear will happen if I loosen my grip? Just trusting whatever is said. Whatever I feel will happen if I loosen my grip. And then what do I need to loosen this grip? What do I need to do to trust myself to loosen this grip? And just reminding yourself of that. Putting your hands on that part of your body, just taking a deep breath in. And exhaling it out. And opening your eyes. And just once again, writing down, noting where you have that tight control over something in your life. And what do you fear will happen if you loosen control? And then what do you need to do, or who do you need to be? What do you need to give to yourself to loosen that control? Dun, da, da, da. And then the invitation is to loosen that control, right? And maybe it is to have a conversation with someone. Hey, it would really help me trust you more and relax into this if XYZ happened, or if you were able to do XYZ, is that something that you're willing to do for me, right? You can frame it as a request. If it's like in regards to an upcoming vacation and wanting to release expectation, you can also say like, what is the feeling that I want to feel on that vacation? How can I cultivate that right now? How could I get that even if we don't get to hit X and Y and Z places on that vacation trip or whatever it might be? So oftentimes when we have tight boundaries around something, it means that we don't feel safe, right? Because we're trying to control the outcome. And so when we notice that we don't feel safe, it's kind of also checking in with our inner child, like checking in with little Meredith or little you, what do you need to feel safe right now? Reminding that inner child version of you that like we've done these other things before in these other uncertain times and it's worked out. And I trust that it'll be this or something greater. And so I noticed myself having tight boundaries when it came to my wedding planning for my wedding, right? And so when I talk to inner Meredith, I'm like, it's so understandable that you'd be having all these expectations, because you want everything to be perfect, because this is an important day for you. And I get that. And I know that your intention is just to have fun with your friends and family. So actually when we release this grip of like who needs to be at what part of the wedding with you and when that needs to happen, when we release that grip, you're actually able to enjoy it more. And how beautiful is that? And so it was kind of like talking to myself and reminding myself too, writing down and reminding myself of all the times that I've released expectation, released my grip, and it's worked out even better than I could imagine, right? And so when we remind ourselves we've done it before, where the grip has been loosened and we can do it again, and just reminding ourselves that we got us, that we love us, that helps loosen our grip too and helps us feel safe in our presence. Okay, guys, how are we feeling? We've made it through the boundaries. We've tightened our porous boundaries and we've loosened our too big of a grip one. And you might be wondering, okay, Meredith, you have porous ones somewhere, you have tight grip one somewhere. How can you tell when you need to do what? So when we have porous boundaries, it means that we've been disconnected from our own needs or we're feeling resentful. So resentment or being disconnected from our own needs is a sign that it's time to tighten those boundaries and to honor our worth because we're honoring someone else or something else more than ourselves. And again, it doesn't mean that we're being selfish by doing that. It actually means we're being selfless, because the more we are able to fill our cup, it's like the oxygen mask analogy, right? When we can put the oxygen mask on ourselves first, then we can put it on someone else. And so when we're able to be in tune with our needs, then we can fill our cup, then we can actually show up more fully for others and say yes and really mean it when we're there. And there's this one guy that I met through one of my other friends who will never forget it. I invited him to something in Venice after a really fun weekend in Joshua Tree. And he was like, honestly, I like to say no to things more than I say yes, because if I say no, that's my truth. And if I end up having the energy to show up, then you're pleasantly surprised versus me saying yes and like flaking out and disappointing you. And I really love that idea of undersell, over deliver, right? Undersell meaning like You can err on the side of like, I might not be able to show up. But then if you do, everyone knows that that means you're fully present and you're fully there, versus showing up and feeling resentful, or showing up and like not being fully present because you kind of wish you stayed home, and then you're bringing like non-fuck yes energy, which other people can sense too. And then what's the point of even being there, you know? Okay. So anyways, that was a little side tangent, but the whole point is that, you can, really tell if you need to tighten your boundaries, if you're disconnected from your needs or you're feeling resentful. You can tell when it's time to loosen your boundaries when you're feeling like you're overly controlling things. And if something doesn't go a certain way, then you freak out or it causes you a ton of stress. And that's a sign that you're not in trust with yourself. And like, what do you need to do to loosen that grip so you can trust yourself and kind of release attachment to outcome? And you'll find the equilibrium between boundary setting when you just check in of like, what feels good, in what way can my highest self operate? How would my highest self be spending their time? What kind of people would they be seeing? How much time would they be investing in their own personal growth or creativity? And then letting your highest self speak. And that would be your natural way of being. And then you can form your boundaries around that. So especially if you went to your manifestation from last week of what you want to manifest, like how does that scene look like? And then what boundaries need to be put in place or adjusted so that freedom, that joy, that expansiveness is possible. Okay, guys, if you have any more questions on boundaries, let me know. And I look forward to hearing like what porous boundaries you've tightened and what tight boundaries you've relaxed to find that perfect Goldilocks equation of not too much, not too little, just right. And now with that, we are going to go into communication, because as I was saying earlier in the boundary thing, we can't really have boundaries with we can, but once we vocalize our boundaries to ourselves, oftentimes we need to vocalize our boundaries to others. So communication is really powerful, because communication also shares with others how we desire to be treated. So these are a few things that I want to say before we go into a communication exercise. Is communication is a two-way street. So while we have something we might want to communicate to someone else, it's also acknowledging that if we communicate it, they might have their truth to share with us, right? And just as we might be revealing a blind spot to someone else, we also have to be prepared and get to be prepared for them to reveal something to us. The other few things that I want to say here is framing everything in assuming best intentions when we talk to someone. So rather than assuming that they're going to get defensive, if they're going to snap, because that's how they've always traditionally done it, why not see them in their highest outcome? Why not see them as their highest self? And why not imagine ahead of the conversation, which is something I always do ahead of like my stressful conversations, or I don't even want to use this word stressful, but my big conversations is I'll envision the other person cloaked in like golden light, and I'll envision myself cloaked in golden light, and I'll imagine our hearts like just like transmuting love back and forth to each other and continuing to be like this or something greater for my highest outcome, for their highest outcome, and for both of our highest outcome. So that's something I'll do. And I'll also imagine like shielding myself with energy, like positive energy, so that I can chat with them from a place of equanimity, from a place of not getting knocked off my center point or triggered, knowing that if they do get triggered, that's their own reaction, right? That's their own inner child that may have not been tended to, or that they have their own patterns or baggage. And it also might be their in the moment reaction, but it might not be their long-term response. It could be their knee-jerk reaction, but it might not be how they actually feel in the long term once they've allowed themselves to sit with things. So I like to go into a conversation with all of these feelings of trust. So, and trust for the highest outcome. So there's a few things that I do before a conversation, and I'll tell you guys, and then we can do it together. So the first thing I do before a conversation is I assume best intention first and foremost about the other person. And I do the golden light exercise. I also do the ancient Hawaiian prayer, which you might have heard of, Ho'oponopono, which is kind of saying softly to them internally, I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. And this prayer is basically saying, I love you. I'm sorry for whatever cause or whatever part I played in it, Please forgive me for that. Thank you. And it kind of clears the energy, and it also acknowledges, both parties' radical ownership of your own path in it in whatever way. So I'll do the Ho'oponopono prayer. And there's this other technique this woman taught me, which is similar to the thing that I already laid out to you guys, where, you imagine the situation bubbling up in yourself, and then you exhale, let it go. Imagine it leaving through your feet, turning into soil. And then you take a second breath in to breathe in golden light, and exhale to flush it through your whole body. Then you envision the whole situation boiling up in them, and you exhale, envision it letting go, coming down through their feet. A second breath in to breathe in the golden light in them. Exhale, feeling the golden light completely flush over their whole body. And then saying the Ho'oponopono prayer to them. I love you. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. Thank you. Then imagine putting your hands together, and in between both of you is the situation to be communicated about. The third time, breathing, seeing that situation as a third entity. Exhale, like releasing the tension of it to the earth. Inhale, breathing in the golden light and that energy in between you both. And exhale, having that flush over the situation. And then saying the Ho'oponopono prayer one more time. So that's something that I like to do as well. And then I like to envision two scenarios of the conversation. I like to envision a scenario where everything hits the fan, where the person does not respond in the way I want them to. And I allow myself, before the conversation happens, to feel the anxiety, the stress, the whatever of them not responding well, but I envision myself experiencing it, but still remaining in a state of equanimity, but still remaining peaceful. And so that way, when I allow myself to experience it before the conversation happens, it's like I've already envisioned the worst case outcome. I can't be like thrown for a loop during the actual conversation because I've allowed myself to go there before. So then in that way, I can be more even keeled and like less reactive in my own patterns because I've allowed myself to think about that ahead of time. And then I re-envision the situation again, but this time the highest outcome of them really surprising me with their openness, with their trust, with their flexibility. And I envision both of us having that beautiful outcome of both of us showing up as our highest self, it bringing us either even closer or even deeper in understanding of each other, even if we go our separate ways after. Or if it's like a friend and it's just like a little something you want to express, I envision it like I say it and it's cleared and they're like, oh my gosh, thank you so much for telling me. Like, I'm so glad you brought that up. I wasn't even thinking about that, and bringing us closer, and it kind of just like whatever it is. So to recap the things I do before, I do the Ho'oponopono prayer. I envision that golden light in me, in them, in us, and in the situation. And I envision the worst case outcome, then I envision the highest self outcome for it. So we're going to do that right now. And then we're going to end with a framework that my old executive coach, Victoria, as always, shout out Victoria if you're listening, love this framework so much. Thank you for sharing it with me. So we're going to do a meditation first, and then we're going to end with this framework. How does that sound? Okay, let's do it. I love this meditation. We might have done it together before. It's inspired from the Hoffman process, which I went to in Petaluma, which you guys have heard me talk about so much. It's called recycling. So you can do it after a conversation when you feel like you were in your patterns and you want to be curious about how you could have shown up better, or you can do it before a conversation, which is called pre-cycling, which I highly recommend to do before a big conversation at work, a conversation with a friend, a TLDR, or not TLDR, a define the relationship, DTR talk. It's great. Okay, so go ahead and find a comfortable seat, taking a deep breath in through your nose, and then open mouth exhale. Another breath in, and exhaling it out. And then third and deepest breath in, and exhale. And I want you to go ahead and imagine this conversation that you need to have with this person about setting your boundary, whatever this conversation is that's coming up. And I want you to go ahead and this first time around, imagine the conversation not going well. They don't say what you want. and maybe you get reactive, and then they get reactive, and then you get more reactive, and you just feel yourself not in your highest self. And let that play out, and let that energy start to boil of this worst case scenario, and just go ahead and place your hands on the part of your body where you feel it most intensely. Maybe it's your stomach, your heart, your throat, your head. Go ahead and place it there and just trace it back to where you first might have learned this pattern in childhood. Just noticing where you might have learned it in childhood. And then go ahead and trace it back even further where you might have learned it from a parent or a caretaker. And then keeping your eyes closed with both hands like you're pulling the root of something out. Go ahead and pull it out from your body, getting all that weight and that anxiety and that stress out of your body, pulling it out, feeling the weight of it in your hands. Keeping your eyes closed, start to rub your hands together, rubbing them together, making that noise, feeling the heat between your hands, transforming it into something luminous, into something powerful, into something beautiful, and then opening your hands in your mind's eye, noticing the essence that's been created. And this beautiful essence is now your energy of your highest self. So go ahead and place that beautiful new essence on the part of your body where the old pattern left, breathing it in cell by cell, breathing it in. And as you breathe it in, feeling it lift your shoulders, lifting your spine, lifting the crown of your head, bringing a smile to your lips. And as you exhale, feeling it sent out, down your hips, out your toes, lifting your head, rooting your hips until you are fully your highest self, your best self, your most all-knowing self who knows that as you show up as your highest self and as you do what's best for you, you do what's best for everyone. In this unshakable golden energy, go ahead and replay this conversation, but this time coming from your most compassionate, centered self, who also so deeply knows your value. And noticing how when you approach it with this new energy, how the scene shifts. How does the other person respond? How does that impact you? How do you then respond? And then how does that ripple into other areas of your life, elevating other areas of your life just by you showing up and communicating powerfully in this area? And then imagining that you get to see a full-length mirror in front of you in this highest self energy, noticing the essence and energy of your highest self. Just asking them for a piece of wisdom, the perfect next step to take as you clear this conversation. As you step into this conversation with courage. And then when you're ready, slowly opening your eyes, taking a deep breath in, and exhaling everything out. And as you open your eyes, I want you guys to pause and just write out, what was that first conversation? How did that feel when you were in your worst case scenario? What was the deepest fear? How did it come true? But also, how are you still okay on the other side? And how are you still okay on the other side? Just having felt it out and now kind of seeing where you could contribute to the downward spiral of it. Then once you finish that, I want you to write out, what was my new and true response? What do I know to be true about myself and how I can show up? What are some positive assumptions I can make in this conversation? And what was my highest self's wisdom or advice to me? How can I tap into that right now? Powerful. Okay, as you do that, as you've written that out, now that you have that, I would recommend going back and doing that meditation a few more times before this conversation, so you get so into feeling from a somatic level of how that highest self energy feels. And then what I would say is, I think that, the last most powerful thing I'm going to share with you guys is the framework. So now that we have that felt level of how we can show up in this conversation, in this communication, we're going to go do a framework that I think is so powerful. And then I'll give you an example of the many different times that I'll give you a few examples of how I've communicated in the past with people. So this framework is called Alpha. Again, my old executive coach, Victoria, taught it to me, and it's ALPHA. So the first A is acknowledgement. Then it's long-term vision is the L. P is the problem. H is happiness, right? What does happiness look like for both of us? And the last A is ask. What is my ask? And this is the real zinger, because a lot of times people bring things up to someone else, but they haven't done the work of sitting with themselves to figure out what their clear ask is of the other person. So I think when we're going to sit with ourselves, when we're going to bring something up, it's really powerful to be like, this is my ask. This is what I need moving forward. Because then if we can be clear on that, we actually then give that person a roadmap of how to honor that. So I'm going to give you guys an example from me and Spencer. And then I'll give you like a few examples in professional and personal life of communication. But the first, like this was when when he first left LA and we were falling in love with each other. We thought, oh, I'm probably going to like try seeing this person. Like from my end, I wanted to like give our relationship a shot, but I didn't want to be in an open relationship with him. Like as in like if he was going to date other girls and like along his journey from Canada to Argentina and like Costa Rica or wherever on his motorcycle, like I didn't want to be a part of that. I wanted to adjust my boundaries accordingly. And we first had a don't ask, don't tell policy when he left LA. But I realized like as the weeks went on and we were Zooming every day and, calling each other like cute baby names, like I realized that it didn't feel good for me anymore to feel like we were basically in a relationship, but he could also equally go meet someone right then and there and hook up with them. And that would be, what we had previously agreed upon when he left LA, or we didn't agree upon it, but it was just more the don't ask, don't tell thing. So when I brought it up to him, I used the Alpha framework. So the first A was acknowledgement. Like, hey, I acknowledge so much, like how great we've been in keeping in touch with each other. I acknowledge how much we've grown to care for each other. And I acknowledge you for like keeping in touch with me during like all of these crazy travels of yours. The L is the long-term vision. My long-term vision is that being in a relationship will make us both even more free. And instead of the opposite of not free, it'll make us even more free because we'll feel like we have a rock, a person that can come home, that we can share all of our stuff, our stories with, like while everything is changing around us, like geography, life, and everything. The problem is that I realized I don't feel safe anymore with this current scenario. The problem is that hold on, guys. The problem is that I realize that I don't feel safe in this scenario any longer. The problem is that I realize like for me, safety equals freedom. And if I don't feel safe, I don't feel free. So what happiness would look like for me, the H, right? What is happiness for both is, if we were able to give this a full shot and like really commit to each other. And I'm not asking that you can't like on your travels, like meet girls as friends, but my happiness would be like us being in a monogamous, intimate relationship together. And that hopefully you would be just as supportive of that. And I would be supportive of your freedom in your adventuring outside of like anything romantic with someone. So my ask is that, can you like commit to me and see where this goes? So that's basically like the Alpha communication. And in that way, I wasn't, and I said like at the end of that ask, I said, if you're not able to do this, that's totally fine. I'm not going to sit here and ask you to choose me. I'll just adjust my boundaries accordingly because my boundaries no longer work in this situation. So I wasn't giving him an ultimatum, and I was also expressing my needs, expressing my desires as a request, and left the ball in his court. What did he want to do? He actually had all the power to decide. And then in that communication, through that open communication, through that respectful communication, we ended up being able to choose each other and make it work, which was so exciting. And yeah, what I was really wanting and hoping for, but did that in that respectful way. So alpha, again, to reiterate, because I want you to write out what your alpha is for your communication, because I'm going to have you do it this week and I want to hear how it goes. The A is acknowledgement, acknowledging the other person. L is the long-term vision. What does the long-term vision look like for both of you? P is the problem. What is the thing that's causing you discomfort? And when you do the problem, try to write it out from a place of neutrality or focusing on you. Like, I feel this way when this happens versus you do this to me, or like any characteristic about the other person. Keeping it neutral, keeping it like, when this happens, I feel this way. H is happiness, right? What does that happiness win-win look like for both of you? And then the last A is the ask, framing it like a request and assuming best intentions of the other person, and also allowing them time to respond, not needing to get a response right in that moment, but letting it be okay if they need to think about it, if they need to see how they feel, and if they need to check in with themselves on like what feels good for them. And other times that I've done this too is I've also had moments in communication where I needed to communicate like with a friend, or maybe it was a friend that we were going our separate ways. And so the ask was actually just like, I ask that I just have my space during this time, and I'll check back in if like anything shifts for me. And those are really hard too, because sometimes when we communicate, we feel like there needs to be like a solution, but maybe the ask is that we just have space, and letting that be okay. And actually the friends that I've had those hard but loving conversations with, when I framed it in alpha of like, I'm always going to be your cheerleader, I'm rooting for you, I'm so grateful for the times that we've had together. And these things are happening where I just kind of need my space right now, even though it might have been harsh for them to receive in the moment. Those are all people who I've had really positive interactions with after, even if it was like a year after, and who have always said like our conversations and our openness in that has like really helped them in XYZ ways. So just know that even if it feels scary in the moment, again, when you do what's best for you, you do what's best for everyone. And these kind of conversations have also been really powerful, not only in my own coaching practice, but also helping my coaching clients, whether it's them talking to their boss or to one of their employees if they are the boss, because the alpha really helps set up that really nice like compliment sandwich, so to speak, and gives a really clear ask or request of the other person. And so there you have it, guys. We set our boundaries. We communicated powerfully to ourselves and then others. And then hopefully you're feeling this expansiveness and this power. And just know that as you have that first conversation, after that clears, you're going to feel so good, and you're going to want to do it in other areas of your life. And the importance of having these kind of conversations is so resentment doesn't build up, because no one's a mind reader. And sometimes we assume that our friends know how we're going to feel, or our partner knows. But the truth is, like, it shows actually that you respect the other person enough for them to handle your truth when you do communicate with them. So it's a really powerful thing. I always call it like an emotional colonic when I have a communication with a friend. And I'm excited for you and what this brings out for you. So step one is doing that boundaries exercise. Where you have porous boundaries, how can you reconnect to what you need and want, and what boundaries need to be put into place? And then the control boundaries, where you so controlling, what do you need to do to trust yourself? And then doing the communication exercises. I want you to actually communicate something to someone this week. I don't need to tell you, you know what's on your heart. And I want you to do that meditation before, where you re-envision the worst case outcome, re-envision the highest case outcome, and then do the alpha communication. Acknowledgement, long-term vision, problem, happiness, ask. You got it, guys? Okay, now I'm so excited for you to feel the expansiveness and freedom on the other side. I'm having an alpha communication this week too. So I as well will be right there with you, walking the fire, wishing both of us luck, trusting in the highest outcome for all. What a powerful episode. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you next week for more powerful stuff.